This is where being short has its disadvantages. I had to come up here and test earlier whether you were going to be able to see me over the flowers, but I think you can see about this much, so you'll be okay, I hope. Well, welcome. Hello, everybody. It's good to see all these faces here. A lot of great smiley faces. Love that. As Dennis mentioned, we have a couple visitors today, at least, because my brothers are here. You might have seen triplets running around. We're not really triplets, but we do look like Elliots. And there's one missing, and there's one brother and a couple of girls, sisters missing too. But anyway, happy to have them here this week with us. While reminiscing, Bob and I were talking, my just older brother Bob, about some of the things that we remember from camping and stuff, and the stories. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of that with you. But I'm not going to reference the Twinkie story today, if you remember that one. But another story that I thought was really cool, we were thinking about when we were dredging. We used to go, my dad was into gold panning. Anybody ever do that? You never do gold panning? Is there any gold around here? Well, we were into gold panning, California gold rush, and we're gold panning. But anyway, for a while there, my dad got into dredging. And so it's like a vacuum, big vacuum hose, and you suck up all the dirt from the river, and it runs through a sluice box, and all the heavier stuff drops into the bottom of these fins and gathers. And you try to find gold like that. And so one year my dad got a hold of some air packs. And so we were able to get in the river and go down and be underwater for a while. And I got to be honest, it wasn't my favorite. Breathing underwater was weird. Anybody ever breathe underwater? Besides in your dreams. I mean, in dreams it's really cool, but it was weird breathing underwater. I didn't really care for it. But Bob, man, he was down there, seemed like all day. He's just down there, just dredging out that river. And it was probably the Yuba River. Do you think it was the Yuba River? But anyway, he got down to the bedrock. Anybody know what bedrock is, right? That granite quarry is probably bedrock, right? I mean, I was told it was 8,000 miles down of granite, right? So he got down to the bedrock, and he was down there for a while, and he's just vacuuming up all that sand and little rock and dirt. Anyway, he comes up out of the water, and he's got a gold rock in his teeth. You remember that? Gold rock, just chunk of gold, and he found a crevice in the bedrock where you could see gold. And I just thought that's the coolest thing, is just getting gold out of the river when I was a kid. Anyway, I wanted to talk about bedrock, or at least about foundations today. Foundations, right? The firm foundation. We sing a song, I don't know if you sing it, but we've sung it. It's a song that says, Jesus, you're my firm foundation. You ever hear that song? Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I know I can stand secure. Oh, Jesus, you're my firm foundation. I put my trust in your holy word. Anybody ever hear that song? We sing different songs on the other coast. But anyway, firm foundations. I want to talk about what is the concrete, solid bedrock foundation of our relationship with God. We know it's Jesus. We know that. We know the Bible says, or Jesus said, don't build your house on the sinking sand. Don't build it on sand. That's not a good foundation, but build it on the solid rock, right? We know it should be there. We know that rock is Jesus. We know that. But I think it doesn't always work out that way in the way we think. I know too many people who, when they think about our foundation of our relationship with God, it has way too much about what we do, our performance, and whether we do it all right or not. Have you ever known anyone like that? Some of us may have. And that's a really weak foundation, because you and I know that even if we do our very, very best, we are still not going to do it perfectly. We're not going to be able to keep God's law perfectly. We're not going to always be as kind as we ought to be, or as patient as we ought to be, right? Now, some of us, I think probably most people in here have understood that. And so we understand there's a need for grace. Amen? Right? Because we know we're not perfect. We're not going to be able to do it perfectly. So there's a need for grace. But there's still a problem with that. Because it seems like it's possible we transfer that, okay, you have to be perfect thing that some people have, which we know you can't. What we do is we say, well, we need grace because we can't be perfect. And then when we get to our part, we might be thinking, yeah, but you got to do your very best. You ever heard anyone say that? I mean, I have. Yeah, you can't be perfect, but you got to do your very best. Can anybody see anything wrong with that as a foundation? I mean, I think we should do our very best. Anybody think we should do our very best? I think we should. Yay! Everybody should do their very best. I get that. But what's the problem with relying on you did your very best? Yeah. I mean, I'm not perfect, but did I do my very best? Did I? Is it possible I could have been a little bit more kind? Could I have been a little bit more patient? Could I have been more generous? Could I have been more loving? Right? I mean, did I really do my best? It's still sinking sand. It's still based on me. There's a scripture I love to quote, and I've told you I wish everybody would memorize just because it just doesn't allow for me to factor myself in to that foundation. It's in 1 Thessalonians 5, 23 and 24. And Paul is saying to them, he says, may God himself, who are we talking about? Who's doing it? God. May God himself sanctify you. What does sanctify mean? Like holify. Make you holy. Make you set apart for him. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you. Who's doing it? In that verse, God's doing it. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. I mean, that sounds pretty complete, doesn't it? May your whole spirit, soul, and body, all of you, however you understand all of that. Is there anything left besides that? May your whole spirit, soul, and body, everything about you, be kept blameless. Be kept blameless. Does that sound like you're doing it? Or does it sound like something done to you? I tried to think of a way to illustrate this. What if Jill was keeping me in the dark about my Christmas present? Which she's not, because I had to have my Beamer fixed. So I know my Christmas. But what if she was? What if she was keeping me in the dark about my Christmas present? I'd be kept in the dark. Was I doing that myself? Or is it something done to me? We understand this, right? I'm passive. There's passive verbs and there's active verbs. When it says, may you be kept blameless, you're passive in that. You're not doing anything. Somebody else is doing something. Who's doing it? God. That's the one who's doing it. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. Now, I want you to just sift through all those words and tell me how much of that foundation of our relationship with God is footed, is pillared on you. How much in those words I just said? Zero. You know, if you have, we were talking about this on the way here. My brother Bob does a lot of construction stuff, and so I was talking about, like, I thought the slab was like all there is of the footing, and he was saying, no, there's, wherever you're going to have bearing walls and stuff, you have other deeper concrete footings for everything. But anyway, my mom's house was built on, it was just a house, and it had, like, I think 4 footings, or maybe there's 6 or whatever it was. But anyway, you could crawl under it. And so houses that Jill and I have had in the years, they've been on slab. You couldn't really crawl under, it's just on a slab. But those houses that are built above the ground a little bit with a crawl space, the foundation is those footings. I don't know how many I don't really know how many I had. But what if 3/4 of those footings were on solid bedrock, and then the other fourth was on sand? Is that good? Maybe 3/4 of the house will still stand, but when the rain and the storm comes, a fourth of it's going down, and that house is probably not good anymore, right? Call the insurance company. When we think about the foundation of our relationship with God, somehow we just keep pulling ourselves into that foundation so that it's still based on us, even if it's only this much. And the problem with that is we're not faithful. We might be really, really faithful, but we're not perfectly faithful. We're not reliable. And you say, Randy, I think I'm pretty reliable. You know, in the Bible, humanity is just not reliable. Have you ever noticed that? I printed out because I might remember them, I might not, but I print them out just in case. After God brings Israel out of Egypt, and he flexed his power over all the gods of Egypt, like 10 gods of Egypt, and he said, nope, I'm really God, and let my people go. And they come out, and here's this motley crew of people that are slaves, and they, not militarily trained, and they're escaped from the most powerful nation on the planet, and here they are at Mount Sinai, and God just showed his power for them. Moses goes up and gets the law, and while he's doing that, what are the people doing? What are they doing? They're building a golden calf. Of course, they claimed they weren't doing it. They just took all their gold and threw it in the pot, and out came a golden calf. We didn't do it, right? People are not reliable. So in Exodus 32 it says, they have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. How long did they wait to do that? It's only been a matter of days since they left Egypt, since they saw God's power for them. And here they are building a golden calf because it resembles one of the gods of Egypt. And then Joshua. So after the Exodus, now Joshua is taking them into the promised land. And you may remember that famous passage in Joshua 24 where he says, choose you this day whom you will serve. And then he says, whether the gods of the Amorites or whatever. And then he says, but me and my house, what does he say? We will serve the Lord. That's what Joshua says. And so the people then, they say a whole bunch of words. They say, in Joshua 24:16, they say, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods, for it is the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight and preserved us in all the way that we went and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land, and therefore we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God. Yay, those are great words, aren't they? Don't we want everybody to say those words? You know what Joshua's response to that is? You are not able to serve the Lord. That's what he says. Right? We hear people say that. It's like, yeah, right on. We got a great church. Yeah, you're going to do great. That's the attitude we want. Yay, Jesus. Joshua says, you're not able to serve the Lord. He's holy. He's jealous. You can't do it. And he was right. Because what happens in the Judges, the next book? It says this in Judges 2:18. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. And we could go through all the way through the book of Judges and find out this happened over and over and over. Every time the people said, yay, God, we're going to serve you now because you're so cool. You saved us from the Amorites or whatever. And as soon as that judge was gone, what did they do? It's not a good bet. We're not a good foundation. You understand that? We're not a good foundation. And then if we finished off the Old Testament, what if we just looked at all of Samuel, with Saul and all his mess? Kings, David, yeah, he was a great king, but was he a good model citizen, a good model Jesus, Christian follower? No. He was a mess, right? He was a man after God's own heart, but he was a mess. And then all the kings after him, or most of them, it was mostly like this, right? Sometimes a little bit like this, but then like this. A little bit like this, then like this. That's where we're at. We are not a safe bet. We're not a firm foundation, but we keep putting ourselves into the foundation. And it disrupts our faith. It causes us to wonder and worry. Well, does God really like me? I mean, is God really for me? Is he against me? Am I going to be saved? Am I going to be lost? How can I know? I don't know if I've done enough. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I know enough. All those questions. Because I'm putting myself as part of the foundation of my faith. And I think we do that because a lot of our relationships are reciprocal. Aren't they? The easiest one to see is employer-employee. Right? The employee does something, a service provides a service, the employer writes a check. Right? That's how it works. What if the employee stops showing up for work? Is the employer going to keep writing those checks? No. What if the checks start bouncing? Is the employee going to keep showing up for work? It's a reciprocal relationship. You do this, I'll do this. If you don't do this, I'm not doing that. Right? Friendships are like this, maybe not as cut and dry, because you can put up with a friend that becomes toxic for a while because you're friends, you care about them. But there's probably going to come a time when enough of your stuff is missing or broken or enough toxicity has come into your life that you may have to just kind of remove yourself from that friendship. I hope that's never happened to you, but you understand? It may happen, right? If it gets too toxic, you may have to do that. So there is a reciprocity in friendships. And between husbands and wives. It should be a covenant. It should be, till death do us part, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. I'm just going to stay there no matter what you do. But the reality is, the foundation of a marriage is faithfulness to the vows. I'm going to love, honor, and cherish you. And if one party is unfaithful in their loving, honoring, and cherishing long enough, and especially if they're unfaithful in very hurtful ways, the foundation of that relationship will erode, will it not? And sometimes fail. So there's reciprocity in all these relationships that we have. And so naturally, when we think about our relationship with God, what do? We just project the same thing. It's reciprocal. If I do these things, God's going to do those things. But if I don't do these things, God's not going to do those things. And we're left with, I don't know if I've done the things. I tried, but did I do it good enough? And what happens to my foundation? I have no confidence. I have no hope. And so we're looking at the Old Testament. We're like, man, they always went astray. They always messed up. Why did God even give them a law? Why did he say, here's a law, if they're just going to break it all the time? Well, we forget God didn't just give them a law. In the law of Moses, here's a law. Almost a third of that law is the Levitical sacrificial system. What's that? Isn't that the system of grace and mercy and forgiveness because I know you're going to break the law? Why did God give a third of the law, or almost a third of the law, is all of the details about how you're forgiven for breaking the law? Did God know you were going to break the law? Yes! Not just once. He knew it would be a way of life that you will not live up to the law. He gave the law to show the right way, the consequences for breaking the right way. But he gave it knowing that's not the foundation of your relationship. God remained in relationship with Israel that whole time, all the way up until he punished them through Babylon and Assyria. But The whole time they were not faithful to keeping the law, but they were his people. What, weren't they? Do I got that right? They were his people. He kept trying to love them. He kept trying to lead them. He kept trying to discipline them, but they were his people. But not because they were keeping the law. And the law came to show that the relationship with God must be based on all of this grace and mercy. That's what we should be seeing in the law, is God's giving the system. And that system was a shadow of what he's going to do in Jesus. It was just a shadow. The reality in Jesus is even far better. Amen? So I say all that because when we get to the New Testament, Jesus, this is often difficult for us to wrestle with. Jesus' disciples, in fact, Jesus, one of the things Jesus is most often accused of by the religious leaders is of breaking the Sabbath. Right? When he healed this guy, oh, he's breaking the Sabbath. He shouldn't be doing that work on the Sabbath. And when he healed that guy on the Sabbath or told that guy to carry his mat, he's breaking the Sabbath. He's not obeying the Sabbath. And usually when that happens and we read it, we know we have to say, well, Jesus is law abiding, so he's not really breaking the Sabbath. And his disciples aren't really breaking the Sabbath. What's really happening is those guys are being nitpicky. They're not being fair with the law, and they're not reading it rightly. So we try to protect Jesus and his disciples and say they're not really breaking the Sabbath. And this is uncomfortable for us. Because if you just read it, it looks like they're breaking the Sabbath. When Jesus heals a guy on the Sabbath, and the religious leaders say, you shouldn't be doing that, you're breaking the Sabbath. You shouldn't be working on the Sabbath. In one place in John, I think we've gone through it earlier in John in our class. Jesus doesn't say, no, I'm not working on the Sabbath. He doesn't say that. He doesn't argue with them and say, no, I'm not breaking the Sabbath. He doesn't say that. He says, my Father's always at work, and so am I. He doesn't say he wasn't working on the Sabbath. He says, I am working on the Sabbath. In this passage I want to share with you today, in Matthew 12, this is happening, and we need to try to figure out what's going on here. In Matthew 12 it says, at this time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. He just likes to pick on them, likes to get them stirred up about the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Now, I know I used to think about that and think, well, they're being nitpicky. They're not harvesting grain. They're not working. They're just getting their food. And then I thought, well, if you read Exodus 16 about getting your food, you remember when God started giving them manna? He specifically says, 6 days you are to collect that manna. And on the sixth day, you should collect how much? Double. Why should you collect double? Because, well, for Saturday, right? For the Sabbath. For the next day, because you're not supposed to be collecting on that day. So you should have already gotten it on the sixth day. So you can collect on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But on Friday, you're supposed to collect twice as much because tomorrow, the Sabbath, is a day of rest. Don't go out to collect it because God's not going to give it. It's not going to be there. So don't expect to find it because you're supposed to rest. When were these guys collecting their food? Was it the first day or the second day or the fifth day or the sixth day? When were they doing it? It was on the seventh day. So the Pharisees were actually right. They were right. Jesus' disciples were collecting their food on the seventh day. And Exodus 16 says, well, don't do that. And when Jesus explains, he doesn't say, no, they weren't. No, they weren't doing anything wrong. No, they weren't breaking the law. He doesn't say that. That's not his argument. They say, your disciples are working on the Sabbath. They're collecting on the Sabbath. They shouldn't be doing that. Jesus' explanation is, Have you not read where David broke the law? David went to Abiathar the priest. I think it was Abiathar. Went there. His men were hungry. He was fleeing from Saul. Saul was trying to kill him. He went in there and he ate the bread that was only for the priest. That was the law. It was the holy bread set aside for the priests, for them to do their holy ministry. David and his men ate that bread. That's Jesus' answer. Well, didn't you read when David broke the law? And then he brings it more contemporary. He says, your priesthood, right now, if a baby's born and has to be circumcised on the 8th day, and the 8th day falls on a Sabbath day, the priests are there in the tabernacle in the temple, and they're doing what? Breaking the Sabbath, because they're keeping the law of circumcision. They're doing it. I want you to hear this. Jesus is not saying they didn't break the law. We want to say that because we don't get it. How could they be breaking the law and that be okay? But Jesus says, well, David broke the law. Your priests are breaking the law. The way you're applying it, everybody breaks the law. And here you are attacking my disciples. In fact, at one point, Jesus says, hey, if a donkey falls in a ditch, if your donkey falls in a ditch, don't you go and get it out? You break the law yourself. Don't come attacking my disciples. Who are you? We saw this. We talked about it in class. We saw this when they were attacking the woman who was caught in adultery. They were like, she broke the law. She's like, okay, she broke the law. Go ahead and stone her. But let the one of you who hadn't broken the law be the first one. What Jesus is doing here is he's saying, you guys are operating as though your law keeping is the basis of the relationship with God. And you're condemning them. But none of you keeps the law. And that is not the basis. There is a purpose for the law, but it's not that. You're wrong in the way you're applying that. And then Jesus says this. In verse 7. And if you had known what this means, and then he quotes from Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. You would not have condemned the guiltless. Earlier in Matthew 9, he said, go and find out what this means. And he quotes the same verse in Hosea 6. Go find out what this means. But apparently they didn't. Because right here in Matthew 12, he says, if you only knew what this means. Well, what does it mean? Why is it such a mystery? It looks plain enough. He says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Well, what does that mean? It sounds like he's saying you should be merciful. That's more important than offering animals. Why is that so mysterious? Why do I have to go and find out what it means? It says what it means what it says. Well, maybe that's not true. If Jesus has to say, go and find out what this means, and if you'd only know what this means, is it possible it means something more than just the obvious? Probably. So we go back to Hosea. Now listen, Hosea is not a book about, hey, God's people, you should be more merciful. That's not what it's about. Hosea is a book that says, God's people, you guys are harlots and adulterers. That's what Hosea says. You guys are faithless. You guys always turn away from me. That's what Hosea says. So this is not a book where he's saying you should be more merciful. That's not going to be the point. The point of Hosea is you're such a mess and God continues to love you in order to bring you closer. He knows you're a mess. He loves you anyway. God so loved the world. Which world? The sinful world. The broken world. He so loved sinners that he sent his only son. Hosea is a book about God's limitless love for sinners. And so here's this verse in chapter 6. This is where it says, for I desire, in verse 6, for I desire mercy, or the word has said, steadfast love or mercy, and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. But before he says that, the chapter begins like this. Listen carefully. Jesus said, go find out what this means. That's what we're doing. Is that okay? He said, go find out what this means. That's what we want. We want to know what it means. So we begin reading in this chapter, and it says, this is from the voice of God's people. These are the Israelites. These are the people of Judah. These are God's people. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us that he may heal us. He has struck us down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will raise us up, that we may live before him. Let us press on to know the Lord. His going out is sure as the dawn. He will come to us as the showers, as the spring rains that water the earth. These are great words. Don't we want everyone to say these words? Come, let us return to the Lord. Let us be faithful. Let us do his will, so that he will bless us and give us the showers and blessings. Aren't those great words? Don't we want everybody to say those words? And then in the voice of God, it says this: what shall I do with you, O Ephraim? Really? That's the response? Where's the, yay, I finally got to you. Yay, you're finally going to keep the law. Yay, you're finally going to be good enough. You're finally going to do it right. I'm so proud of you. Where's that? But they say all these words, and they're like, yay, God, we're going to be your people. And God says, what am I going to do with you? Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew. That doesn't sound so bad. But then he says, that goes early away. What does he mean by that? You're like the morning dew. It's here for a moment. It promises so much, and then it's gone. You get it? After saying that, after having Israel go, yay, we're going to be your people, and God saying, I don't know what to do with you. You keep making those promises, and you keep failing. You keep turning away from me. Then he says, talking about the prophets and how their word has broke them, but in verse 6, that this is what you should understand. For I desire mercy, or steadfast love, covenant love, and not sacrifice. The knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Here's where we have to tweak this a bit. He's not saying, I desire mercy from you. And these aren't people who are not having mercy on each other. I mean, they probably are, but they're not doing anything right for each other. He's saying, what I really wish the foundation of our relationship was, not your promises to be good enough, because that's worthless. Because you're not, and you're not going to be. That cannot be the foundation of this relationship. What I want it to be is mercy. That you understand my mercy. That's what Hosea is all about. And then it says, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. I want you to understand our relationship is not built on you making all these sacrifices. This relationship has to be built on you have come to understand I am for you. I love you. I'm on your side in the sense that you are trying to be in relationship with me. I am for you. That's the hardest thing to believe about God, that he's for me. Because my brain starts telling me, well, I'm not really, there's some things I could fix. I could be better at this or that. And I start thinking he's not. I think he's against me. We got to get rid of that. I'm never going to be a sure foundation for what God is doing. Jeremiah 9:24 says, but let the one who boasts boast about this. See, when we base it on ourselves and we think we're doing pretty good, when we compare ourselves with those other guys, and we think, yeah, we're doing it right at our church, and we serve the community more than those other churches, and we got better doctrine, our preacher's better than those preachers, and our teacher's better than those teachers, and all that becomes boasting about all this stuff about me. And those religious leaders, they were boasting. And there's a lot of people today, they're all full of boasting. But Jeremiah, God says, if you want to boast, here's what you can boast about. That they have the understanding to know me, that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. You want to boast about something? Boast that you're coming to know God in His mercy, in His love, that He's for you. That's the foundation. That's a sure foundation. And if we allow that to be our foundation, we'll find the nuggets of gold. If that's not been your foundation, if that's not your experience, and you want to make a confession of faith, you want to pray for God or to open your eyes to see Him more clearly, we'd love for you to do that today. You can do that as we stand and sing a song.